All right, so in this particular video, we're going to look at PHP, right? And then for us to look at PHP, we need to have a bunch of things installed. So first things first, please ensure you have Visual Studio Code installed. So you have to install Visual Studio Code, right? Install Visual Studio Code on uh, your computer. If you go to this link, you can actually get installed depending on the device you're using. Then also install XAMPP. Here, XAMPP, right? XAMPP. Download and install XAMPP for your device, right? So you can see that for Windows, Linux. You can try to follow whichever of them, right? So you can download XAMPP. You can see it's going to start automatically downloading and things like that, right? So if you click download, you can see. Sorry about that. If you click download, right, you can come here and download the files for your device, right? So please ensure you download and install XAMPP and download and install Visual Studio Code. And right, if you download Visual Studio Code, please try and install. There are a couple of PHP. We go to the extensions, right? We come here. I believe it's PHP. There's this PHP extension. Let's just load. So I'll pause the video until it loads. Okay, it's up, right? So you can see that I've installed this, right? So it's good. No, not that. You can see that I've installed all of this, right? So install this, install this, right? It will really help you in working with PHP on Visual Studio Code. Okay, all right. So you install XAMPP and then you install XAMPP, right? So let's actually get started, right? Let's get started. Let's get started. So you can see that it's trying to install XAMPP, right? It's trying to download it and install it, but I already have this, so I think there's any point for this, right? So let's actually install. Let's get started, shall we? So once you install XAMPP, right? Once you install XAMPP, you actually, if you come to your local disk, you see this XAMPP folder, right? So this is where, and you see this htdocs. So basically, this is where you're going to have your files. So when you want to access your PHP applications, this is where you're going to like access them, and all that stuff, right? This is where you're going to access them. So we're going to create a new folder. We're going to call it tutorial, right? Backend tutorial. So basically, for the introduction to back-end web development, the projects we're going to be working on, we're going to put them from that folder here. So when we do that, we're going to create a new folder here, and we're just going to call it let's call it hello, right? Or let's see, hello, right? Let's just call it hello because that was like the first application we're working on, right? So we'll go to open folder. Let's open the folder, and then we look at, we come here with the local disk, XAMPP, htdocs, backend tutorial, hello. So you can see it, right? So that's the folder there. That's the folder, right? Yes, I chose the author. So that's the folder. So how do we get started? We're going to create a PHP file. So we'll do this. So I want to create an index.php, and remember to save it as .php. You could call it whatever name you want, but I want to save it as index.php because on the live servers, the application, the server usually goes to look for the index.php file for a lot of cases, right? As the first file to load. So how do we start writing code in PHP? If we want to start writing code in PHP, actually, we have to put this particular thing, but we're going to put PHP like this. So the web browser knows that, okay, whatever we're writing here is actually PHP, right? So this is the first step to writing PHP code. All right. So let us do something, the very basics, and let us echo hello world. So echo is literally like a statement you can use to output something to the browser. So if I want to actually view this, before I can use it, I have to open up XAMPP. How do I do that? If I search for XAMPP, right? XAMPP control panel. So I have to open up XAMPP. And once that opens up, right? So before you can actually use PHP, you have to open that up. MySQL2 is always safe when you run two of them. So we start these two services like this, and then let's go to our browser. How do we access this, right? So if I want to access that file, I go to localhost, right? Localhost, and because I created another folder, so I will go to that folder I created, right? So look, I'll go to that backend tutorial, and then when I do this, hello, yeah, sorry about that, I forgot there's an hello folder there, right? So you can basically see that once I did this, it loaded the index of PHP file. If I do index.php, it loads that file, right? So this is what is exported here, right? You can see this, it's actually showing here, right? So we can actually see that. So we can actually have HTML written in PHP, they work together, right? If I want to write HTML inside of PHP, I'm just going to dynamically generate this. If you watch the front end tutorial, you will see how that came up. But what I'm going to do now, if I press the shift, then I press the key that has exclamation mark here, in this case is 1 on my PC, Windows PC, and I press enter, it's going to generate some HTML code. So let's do that. So you see that, right? So once I do this, you can see that it's still going to show there, right? It's still going to show that up there, right? And I could still have H1 here, and I would say H1 hello PHP, right? And it's still going to show this, right? So you can see that they're all embedded together, right? But I just wanted to show that the reason being is because we're going to be working a lot with that, and we're going to develop a small PHP application by the time we're done with this video to showcase how PHP can be used, right? So it's going to be a bootstrap calculator, but this time with PHP. We're going to use bootstrap. So but I just wanted to get all those up and running first to show you how this works, so that when we get there we'll actually know. But let's get to the core basics of PHP, right? So let me get rid of all of this, trying to show you that so that when we get there. So creating variables, right? And then we're focusing on the very basics. So we're creating variables, right? So if you want to create a string, right, this is how you would create a string. If you put them in double quotes like this, right, and you say echo string, it's going to echo what was going to happen. So it's going to echo this, right? It's doing that. That's the string. So the reason why it's showing all of this is because this echo is online on this, and then it's showing this too on the same line. So let us put a line break, right? Because I told you that HTML2 is embedded in PHP. So if we put a line break and we say this, please, for this particular course, you should actually have a good knowledge of HTML and CSS. If you've not had that knowledge first, please go and watch the HTML and CSS video. And please, it's good to have understanding of JavaScript, preferably to understand what we're doing here. Unless you already have a good knowledge of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, etc., you should, that's when it comes to front end, the basics of front end. If you don't know the basics of front end, I strongly recommend you actually go and watch the front end video we have, right? And then understand, learn all of that too. So by the time we put this, right, this is break line, you can see that, right? So it has put that there. So that is how you create a variable in PHP. So you can use camel casing, right? In this case, you can say, okay, let's create an integer. So we say integer, right? We can use camel casing. Let's say integer number 1, camel casing, and we can actually put number at the end like this, and it starts with a $sign. That's how it works. So let's just say 1, right? And if we say echo, right, let's copy this here and paste it here. Then we say echo integer number 1. What's going to happen? You can see that here, right? So let's create a float, right? So we say float equal to 10.5, and then we say echo br, right? And then we say echo say float, then right. Let's see. So you can see that is there, right? So let's do something else. let us create a boolean. Let's see, this is decimal numbers. Yes, how do we put comments in PHP? So we can use this for single line comments, then we put the comments. We can equally use this to do this, and then we have the multiple line comments when we end with this like this. You can see it has completed it from Visual Studio Code. So when you have this, you keep typing and keep having your comments. So those are ways you can put comments. What are comments? Basically, comments are non-executable code. So what happens is, it's like you are taking notes in your program. PHP is not going to execute it. It just sees it and be like, oh wow, okay, yeah, I believe you were trying to like drop a note maybe for like the other developers or something, because sometimes you might not be the only one working on a project. You might be working with other people, so you need to properly document your code. And even if you are working alone on a project, right? Imagine you're trying to provide some updates to the project, and you come back 3 months, 6 months later, and you didn't comment on your code. Like, just think of how confused you might be. You'll be like, what is this supposed to do again? What is it supposed to do? It's going to take you quite some time before you figure out what you're supposed to do. But with comments, it helps you to easily know what went, what is what, and what is not what. So you should make it a good practice to comment your code. So we put here string, and then we put here integer, right? So boolean is either true or false. So if we say false and we say echo boolean, right? So true or false, what happens? So okay, sorry about that. Let's do something. Let's actually show that this is there, right? So if we come, we're going to get to the if construct later on, right? But I just want to show something. So let's say if boolean is equal to true, and let's show echo let's say echo true, or let's say else echo false. And we're going to come back to this later, but I just wanted to show you something about boolean, right? And then so you would see false, right? But by the time I change here to true, you will see true. So boolean, they are either true or false. They only hold two values. They're either true or they are false, right? So the kind of values that they hold. So how do you create an array, right, in PHP? So basically, what are arrays, right? Arrays, please to also have a good understanding of JavaScript to make things easier for you for this. So arrays in PHP, right? You might want to store a collection of data that are related, for instance, or a collection of data, right? So it's just like when if you're into cooking or a chef or something, you could have a basket where you keep onions, right? So that basket stores onions. They're all like onions. So if we want to have something like that here, we'll do this to create an array, right? So we'll say array, and we do this, and let's say apple, an array of fruits. You specify the elements, and let's say banana, right? So by the time you want to echo this, right? Let's say variable dump. We use variable dump to, like, you understand, dump information about a variable, and we say array, right? And then when we do this, you can see, and we can equally use variable dump, right, for this here. So we could equally say variable dump and boolean, and you will see that there. So let's look at this. You can see true, right? Yes. So let's put some line breaks to properly differentiate this, right? Okay, that should do that. Awesome. All right, we still have one more here. Perfect. So that's how that is, right? So if I want to get the first index in the array, right, I can do this. So the first index is 0, second one is 1, but the total of 2 elements are actually here, right? So if I say array 0, it gives me the first element, right? and then if I say 1, it gives me the second element. So if I come and say count, right, to count an array, right, to count the elements in an array, it's going to give me 2. So we can see all of that actually there, right? So let's look at arithmetic operators, and then let's look at some logical operators that we can actually use, right? So if we're looking at arithmetic operators are operators you can use to perform operations on variables in PHP, right? And then how does this actually work, right? Once more, please, I would strongly recommend you watch JavaScript tutorial if you haven't watched it before, right? For the introduction to JavaScript, it will really help you to understand some core programming concepts, right, for PHP. And before you dive into back-end web development, please try and watch or have a good knowledge on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript before you jump into back-end. We strongly recommend it. If you don't have that before, just go and watch the course, follow up with the course on the front-end web development, right? So how do we do this? If we look at this, right, and then we want to run some logical operators. So let's first look at arithmetic operators, right? Let's say num1 equal to 1, and then num2 equal to 2, and let's create a variable sum and say sum is equal to num1 plus num2, and then let's just variable dump. Just dump. So dump is like used to, you can see that dumps information about a variable, like I explained before. And let's say sum, right? So you can see it's showing integer 3, right? That's the sum of the both of them, right? And then let us quickly put this here. So we'll have a line break, right? We can see that that's the sum, right? Okay, so let's look at something. The same way we have that, we can equally have, let me just put results, right, so that it will make more sense here, so that we can be changing that. So if we change this to subtraction, right, you would see it will produce the result. You can see -1. If we change this to multiplication, you can see the result, right? And if we change this to division, you can see the result there, right? You can see the result. So basically that's that on that. So let's look at some but we'll look at comparison operators more when we come to the if structures, the control structures, if structures, and that's what we're actually going to right now, right? So let's look at what is the if control structure. So control structures are more like, hey, maybe you want a code to execute based on the condition is true, right? Just wants to execute once and then move on to the next thing, right? So let's assume on a practical situation is somebody calls you on the phone and you don't want to pick. Maybe there's a particular person you don't want to take the person's call because you feel like maybe you're not in the mood to talk to that person. Or no, that's not the best time you want to talk to that person. Maybe you want to talk to the person when you are in a much better place to talk. So practically, if your phone rings, you check who called you. If it's that person, you do not pick the call. But if it's not that person, you pick the call, right? So let us do it. Let us look at how we can do that in PHP. So let's say string. Let's say name is equal to John. Let's assume John is not the person you want to actually talk to, right? And then if name, so this is practically used to check for if the variable holds that particular value. So if name is equals to John, right? So let's put a BR here so that everything will just echo BR, right? If name is equal to John, right, then we'll say echo, right, just echo do not pick. So based on the name is equal to John, you're saying do not pick, right? But once I change the name, I change here I change the name to James, right? You can see it does nothing, right? So how do we resolve that? Let's assume you actually wanted to do something if it's not John, like pick if it's somebody else other than John. So that's where the else comes in, and you can put an else and say echo pick, right? Pick the phone, right? I'll just say pick. So once is James, you can see pick, but once is John, you will see do not pick, right? So that is that on the if. So you can have if, else, if, and then else. What do I mean? Let's assume if it's John, do not pick. If it's James, let's assume else. If it's James, you want it to pick, but okay, let's assume if it's James, instead of not speaking, you want to send a message, right? Instead. So then if it's any other person, just answer the call, right? So if John, do not pick, else if name is equal to James, right? You would say echo echo send a message, right? Then you say else echo pick. So John, do not speak, right? Once the name is James, then you have send a message, right? Because the name is James. And once the name is something else, let's say Michael, then what do we have here? Pick, right? So that's how that actually works, right? So let's basically look at the switch statements, right? So what is a switch statement? It's another type of conditional, right? So this is how it works. So let's just put a line break here, right? And then we say day. Let's say day is equal to Monday, right? And then let's switch. So this is how it works. Switch, then the variable you're trying to do a switch for, right? And then you do case. So case, so it has a switch statement, switch, then the variable, the situation you're trying to switch for, right? The variable. So case, we say if it's Monday, right? If it's Monday, then echo today is Monday, right? So then you would say break, right? After that executed that, break, right? And then case Tuesday, if it's Tuesday, echo today is Tuesday, right? So echo today is Tuesday, and then you break, meaning to break, from the case. And then default is if it's neither Monday nor Tuesday, just like you have in the else, if, and else. Then what should it do, right? Then the default would be just echo unknown day, right? Unknown day, and then so that is that. So let's look at it, right? Monday, today is Monday, right? If we change this to Tuesday and we save Tuesday, today is Tuesday. Let's change it to Wednesday and we save unknown day. So basically that's how that actually works. So we're actually going to look at three types of loops in this case, right? We're going to look at the while loop, the for loop, and the for each loop, right? So basically that's what we're going to look at. So let's first take the while loop, right? So a loop in PHP is like a block of code you want, like is a code you want to keep running provided the condition is true. It's similar to, like, let's say you're connected to the internet and you're on a social media app, let's say WhatsApp or any other social media app that someone can use to send you messages, and provided you're connected to the internet and that person is not blocked, right? Or the person didn't block you too. If the person sends you a message, you're connected to the internet, you should receive the message, right? So if you don't want to receive the message anymore, just disconnect from the internet, provided you don't want the person blocked, right? And you still want the person to send you messages. So that's a loop. So how do we do while loop? So this is syntax. While, you have the keyword while, and then the condition that we make it to be true, right? So in this case, let's say let's first create a variable. Let's say integer I, and let's say 0. So while the condition, I will make it to be true, while I is lesser than 5. So that's this condition is what we enable it to be true, right? And let's just say echo, right? Echo I, right? But now I want to introduce something. We'll put the dots, and then we say let's put BR. Now what exactly is this dot, right? Now we have two variables, right? Let's say we have first name equal to James, and we have last name equal to John, right? First name equal to James, last name equal to John, and we want to join the two names to become one, right, in one variable. So we'll use, let's create full name, right? And we'll say equal to first name dot, that is how you join them. So I'm going to put a space in between two of them, so that's, you don't use a plus, you use the dot in PHP, and then we'll have last name. So with this, right, that is what now becomes first name and last name. And by the time we do echo, right, we echo full name, right, and then let's just put a line break here so that, right, you would see that that is what we displayed here, the full name. So let us see what we have here. Sorry about that. I have an infinite loop. Oh my god, we didn't terminate the loop, right? So let's terminate the loop, and that's what happens. You have to always ensure that the program terminates, otherwise you're going to have an infinite loop that would never end. So let us put I plus plus, and this will, what this essentially means is like saying I is equal to I plus 1. So each time the while loop runs, I increments by 1 until eventually I is now becomes equal to 5, which now makes this statement false, saying is I lesser than 5, no, then this entire loop terminates, right? So let's just refresh this, and that is why you should always ensure that your loop is not infinite. I'm going to copy this and I'll kill this page, right? So that's what happens when you don't specify the condition to make a loop end. It's going to become an infinite loop, and it's going to just keep running. There are times where maybe an infinite loop might be nice, but on average you really want to specify what is going to enable the loop to end. So you can see that we have it shown 5 times, right? 5 times. Okay, so let us actually see how a for loop runs, right? What is a for loop? This is how for loop works. So it's similar to while loop, but this is the difference. Instead of having that integer out there, we'll have it inside, and we'll specify. Then we would say while k lesser than 5, I would say k plus plus. So you can see this is what is here, this is what is here, and then this is what is here. So what's the next step? Let us actually do this. So let's just copy this, right, and then paste it here, and then we say k, right, and then you can see it does the same thing. So basically that is how the for loop works, right? So let us actually see the for each loop, right? The for each loop. So this is how a for each works. So we have for each. So we'll have the array we want to loop through, right? So in this case, we actually have an array here. It's very useful if you want to loop through arrays. So we have an array here. Let's see. Yes, we have this array. So we'll specify the array you want to loop through, array, then use the keyword as array. Let's put A or let's put R. What does this mean? Now for each the array you want to loop through as this. So what it's basically saying is for each of these, right, you're trying to access each of these elements. So that ARR is each of these, right, and this array is this, right. So it's basically going to pick out each member of that element, and then what is the next step is going to take, right. So it's going to this is how the whole thing is going to turn out to be. So if we say echo R and then echo R, and let's put a line break there, BR, right, and we save. Let's see what's going to happen. So you can see apple and bananas, right. You can see apple and bananas. We can still achieve the same thing with a for loop. So if we copy this and we put k equal to 0, let's just change this to L, and we say L is lesser than count, the size of the array, then we say L plus plus, and then in this case we're going to put array, and then we would say L. Now it's going to do the same thing. So basically it's your all choice, right? So it depends. A lot of times you might decide to use this, a lot of times you might decide to use this. So that's basically how arrays work. The for, the while loop and the for each loop, right? So let's quickly look at functions. So a function is like a block of code that you can run again. You understand? Say just like you have younger ones, and let's say you have younger ones and you want to send them on errands. So maybe there's a particular errand you send them on frequently to go buy a particular type of bread. So they already know whenever you give them money and say go buy me this bread, they know what to do. Maybe there's a particular store you like them buying the bread, so they know, and when they're coming back, they're either returning with the bread or they're returning back your money. But basically they know, right? But if you're owing somebody and send them on an errand to go and pay that debt, they are going to pay the debt, and they're not really coming back with any money just to pay the debt. Give them the money and say, go and give this money to this person. I owe him. I want to pay back the debt, and he goes and delivers it. And they're not really expecting any package back. Highest maybe the message saying that okay, I gave it to him, unless you didn't see him, then you return back the money, right? So that's a function, right? So you can run the function multiple times in that regard, right? So how does that work? If we want to run a function, we want to use a function, we use the function keyword to create a function, and then the function name, then these brackets, right? And then we have these curly brackets. So what is the function name? This is the function name, and functions are always better created using camel casing, and they start in small letter. So if you have any other thing, great person, this is how you would do it, right? Start small letter, and that's how you would do it, right? So that is basically that. All right, so let us quickly do something. Let's say echo greetings, right? Greetings, and then let's put a line break here and this. So by the time I run this, right, you see that it's not actually going to run because I haven't told it to execute. But when I come and write greet and do this, then it's going to execute it now. So you can see that it only executes when you call it to, but the block of code was there, but it didn't run until you called it to run, right? But let's create another function greet, but this time we want it to greet somebody, and you have to supply the name. So let's say greet person, right? So you have to supply the name here, right? So you supply name. So that's what we call parameters, right? Arguments. So a function might take arguments. So it's like when you're sending somebody on an errand to buy you bread, you could tell the person the price of the bread. You could tell the person the store you want the person to buy the bread, the price of the bread, the store you want the person to buy the bread. So those two things are parameters that you could specify. So when you want to greet somebody, you could specify the name of the person to greet to. So that is that here. So that's what we are doing here, and we say name. So when we do this and we call this function now, we say greet person, and we specify the name there, right? And we say John, right? So let's see what happens when we run this. Greetings John. So if we change the name here and we say James, we would have greetings James. So basically that is how that works on that. So let's create another function that adds to numbers function add, right? And then we say A, and then we say B, right? So these two functions are going to add number and return it, right? So let's return A plus B. So there are two types of functions: a function that returns something and a function that doesn't return anything. So this function doesn't return anything. It might be outputting this, but it doesn't return anything. If I remove this, you would see that it's running, but it's not showing because I removed that, right? But it's running because of this. So it's not returning anything, but this returns something. Now, how do we know it returns something? You see the return statement. So by the time I do something like this, if I say echo, right? Echo, and I say add, I say 5, and I say 7, right? What is going to happen? You can see that 12, because it returns something. So it returns an integer, and that's how it works. So basically that is that on functions, right? And that's like some of the basics of PHP to get started. So let us handle forms of PHP, right? So this is basically this. So let's handle forms on PHP. So we're going to create a bootstrap calculator that is going to actually take two numbers and then add, subtract, multiply, delete depending on what the user does. So that's what we're actually going to do now. So let's quickly do that, right? So I'm going to underscore this so that it's just going to be there, right? And then I'll create a new index.php. So for us to have that form, right, I use the shift then exclamation mark key and then enter on my Windows computer to do that, right? So my exclamation mark is on the same key with my 1. So I would name this, I would say PHP bootstrap calculator, right? And when I do this, let's quickly generate something. Let's have a form. So I would say form, right? And then before I would say form. But before I do all of this, before I create the form, this is all just HTML. I want to import my bootstrap, right? So I already have like bootstrap here. You can watch the bootstrap tutorial to see how all that came up from. So but I'm just going to get the bootstrap. So let's just get that, and then we'll say bootstrap. So I'm just going to copy that and then going to paste it here, right? So I'm going to paste it here. So while I'm doing this, so this is going to be here, and then once we do that, you can see that it's now inside here, right? So I'm going to link the bootstrap. So for us to use the bootstrap, I have to link the CSS, and I'm also going to link the jQuery, and I'm going to link jQuery, right? So let's copy this. I'll copy this JS, right? I'm going to link that jQuery there for jQuery, right? Alright, so we'll do that. Then for bootstrap, we have all of this right here. So I'm going to do that now. So we'll call this bootstrap CSS. I will say link ref. I will say bootstrap 5.3. right? You can see it has brought out the folder. I will say CSS, and then I'll go to my bootstrap.min.css, and I'll say rel equal to style sheet, and I'll say type equal to text slash css, right? And then I'm going to copy excuse me, I'm going to link jQuery, right? So just link my jQuery. So I'll say script, and I'll say source, and I'll say JS, right, slash this my jQuery script. I'm gonna close that stack. So I'm just gonna copy all of these for Bootstrap, right? And I'll say popper Bootstrap, right? So I'll put here, I'm gonna change this source. I'm gonna say Bootstrap 5.3, right? And I'm gonna say JS, and I'm gonna say popper, right? And then I'm gonna come here, and all these files are actually in here. Like this is this, right? You can see Bootstrap, you can see CSS, you can see JS for this, right? So I'm going to come here and I'm going to change this to bootstrap.min.js, right? All of that there. So this form, I want to create a form, right? And let's create a form. So we'll say, let's go to Bootstrap and just get a form there, right? So we'll go to Bootstrap website, Bootstrap, come here, we click on docs. So please, more of this detailed explanation of how all this came about is in the Bootstrap tutorial. You could actually watch it, right? So we come to forms, form controls, and then I just grab this, right? I just grab this and I'll paste it here, right? But I won't be needing this text area, so that can go, right? So I'll just do this, right? And then here, it's going to take two numbers, so number 1, right? And then here I'm going to change this to number 1, and we'll say of type text, and then here I'm going to change this to text, right? And then placeholder, I wouldn't be needing a placeholder. So let's see what we actually have so far. We will come back here and refresh. You can see this, but well, forgot to do a couple of things. So I'm going to create a div, and we say class container fluid, right? No, I don't want that to close there just yet. And I'm going to say div class row, right? And then it's still going to go, and I'll say div class right equal to call md3, right? I'll copy this. So I'm going to keep this a 6, and I want this all in here, so I'm going to put it like this. So I'm trying to use Bootstrap to create this to make it look right. Let's do alright. So that goes there. So I'm going to end the row, I'm going to end the div, right? So let's look at what we have now. Perfect, looking like more like it. Let's even make it smaller. Let's make it 4, 4, and then 4, right? Alright, so I'm gonna have I want to have a heading. Let's just put okay, I want to have a heading here. I'm going to say h3, and I say PHP bootstrap calculator. Then when we do that, and then I want this to be in the middle, so I'll say equal to text center. And then when I do this, well, you can see that, right? So that takes care of that. So we'll have the number 1. Let's duplicate this for number 2, number 2, and we have to put something name, right? Because without that name, we won't be able to access the value using PHP. So it's important to put that if you want to get that value. So we'll put number 1, right? And we'll give this a name of number 2. So this text now, ID should be, although we won't be accessing the ID in any way, so it's not necessary, but for this particular tutorial, but I'm just going to put it anyways. And then number 1, right? Number 1, number 2. So you can see this 1 and 2. So I'm going to have a button, right? I want 4 buttons, right? I want 4 buttons, and I'm going to say 4 buttons, and okay, these 4 buttons are going to be of type submit, right? So type is button type, would say submit. So submit is to submit a form, and we're going to supply the URL the form is going to submit to here. But let's finish all of this first. And we say class btm primary, right? And we would say name is equal to add, right? So let's do that, and then let's close this. Let's look at this, and then we'll say let's put a plus. That's what we have. Well, it's turning out fine. So I want all those buttons in the center, so we can say text center, and that's going to put that. So I'm going to duplicate this for subtract, multiply, and divide. So we have subtract, we have multiply, or let's put an X, and we have divide, right? So we're going to change this to div. I'm going to change this to, that's for divide. Here will be more. I'm going to change this to sub, right? And then we'll change all these button types. So we'll say secondary, warning, I would say danger, right? Wow. So we have all these buttons now, right? We have all these buttons. So what is the next thing we're actually going to do? We need it to be able to, because as it stands right now, if you input these numbers, literally do nothing, and the form submits to nowhere. If I put this, see, it doesn't do anything, right? It's submitting, but it doesn't do anything. So we need to actually pick it up. So in PHP, when you have a form, the form needs to submit to a place, right? So how do we ensure it's submitting? So we're going to do something. We're going to say method, and the method is the type of form method we're talking about. So there is get and there is post. So if you say get, what that happens is, if you look at this URL, right, you can see that's like a get request. So you can see that all these parameters are specified, they are showing there. That's because we if we explicitly put get now, you are saying that okay, it is literally when that's what we want, right? So we supply that. But if we use post, when that button is clicked, right? So let's look at this, and if we say, if this is clicked, you can see that it's no longer showing that. So that is how post works, right? So let us, that is that, and then let us action, right? Action is where you want it to submit to. So in this case, we want it to submit to this same page. So we say index.php. It could be another file, but we want it to submit to this same page, right? So that's what we're going to do that. So we have to actually check, okay, now let us do the calculation. Before we do anything, we need to first check, was any form submitted? Like, did the person actually try to submit the form to know, right? And let us actually do that right now. Let's check to see if a form was submitted. So how do we do that? We can do it at the top there, but I want to do it around here too, right? Because this is where I want the results to show somewhere around here. So I'm going to have, right, I want the result to show somewhere around here, right? So let's have our PHP, right? then we'll do this. So how do we do that? To find out, Now, since it's supposed to be used here, we can easily say, right, if if request, right, if I'm not mistaken, server, I think it's server method, if I'm not mistaken, equal to post, then do something, right? Let's say echo submitted. Let's be sure that's working first. So okay, server method, let me just get that out. Server method PHP. Just get that. Server name. Sorry about that. Server name. So I believe it's server name. Okay. No. Request method. Yes, sorry, it's request method. So request method. So here we would say request method, right? So this basically just checks to see that if a post request was submitted, and in this case, that's what we're doing here. So by the time we come back here, and when we hit refresh, let's see, still showing. It's server, right? Oh, server, sorry, server. So server. So basically, server is something that we can access from PHP, and then it has a value, is an array available in PHP, and we can have a value, right? We can access this value, right? So this value is to check the server method. So if a post request is what was done, that's what this entire line does, right? It will show submitted, right? So let us come back here. If I refresh this, you can see showing submitted. But if I just refresh the page, it's not showing anything. But by the time I do something, it's showing submitted, means a form was submitted via post method, right? So now this is where we're actually going to do some logic. Okay, so now we have to first check if the person supplied number 1 and number 2, right? If they are not empty. So basically, how do we do that? We need to first check if the person actually even entered number 1 and number 2, right? So so let's get to that. Alright, so we have something called the isEt variable, right? And then that isEt variable is like this. So that isEt variable is basically like this. This is how it works, right? Sorry about that. So let's get to work. So if we say if isEt is a variable we can use to actually check if something exists, right? If isEt, right, then we can use this post to get the value, because it's a post method, right? So we can actually use post to get it, right? So there is actually request. If you use request, then you don't have to, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a post. It could be a get request, right? But in this case, we want to use post to specify that it's a post. So if request, right? If request that's if it was submitted. Now if request number 1, right? If there is number 1 and there is number 2, right? This is a logical operator that says, hey, check if this is this and this is this, right? So it's only going to run if those two conditions are actually met. If there is number 1 and there is number 2, right, then that is when do more things, right? So if there is number 1 and there is number 2, right, we have to put this isEt here. if there is number 1 and there is number 2, right? Then we check if number 1, if if number if number 1 is not empty, right? If number 1 is not empty, right, and number 2 is not empty, so we're trying to say essentially that, okay, if somebody supplied number 1 and number 2, and we are ensuring that, okay, these two values supplied are actually not empty, because we really want you to calculate if it is not, the two numbers supplied are not empty. So now, if those two numbers are not empty, then we have to check to ensure that a numeric distance was entered, right? And there's a PHP function we can use to do that, is numeric. So the only time it's going to run whatever we want it to run is if number 1 is numeric number 1, and that is if number 1, we want to check for number 1 and number 2, we want to ensure that number 1 or number 2 are actually numbers supplied and not just text, right? Supply text like A, B, C, D. So it's only going to do something now. It's going to only check, did the person actually submit? If, as the person click to submit a form, if yes, did the person actually input number 1 and number 2? If the person did, is number 1 and 2 not empty? If they are both not empty, right, then check were numbers supplied. If numbers were supplied, then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to find out what the person wants to do actually, right? So let us see. So we do okay, let's do something. Let's change this to calculate, right? And we say value is equal to add, right? Calculate. So we want all of them to have the same name so that we can check, right? So so here will be calculate, here will be calculate, here will be calculate, and then this value will be divide, value will be divide, value would be multiply, and then value would be sum, right? So it checks name, calculate. So we're going to check if the person actually submitted a name, right? So if he says, let's copy this, right, and we paste it here. Now if he says calculate, right, so that means to check if the person clicked on a button, right, and the type of button, right? If he said calculate and the value, right, and okay, let's do something. If it said calculate, right, so if somebody actually clicked on one of the buttons we provided, right, then what do? We say, we check if we find out the value, post calculate is equal to add, right? If it's add, what do? We add, so we say number 1 equals to this, right? right? So we say number one equal to this, and then we say equal to this, and then we say um, so number one equals to this, and then we're going to get number two, right? So number one equal to this, and we say number two equal to this, right? So let's proceed, right? So number one this and number two this. So if it's add, what are we supposed to do? We'll say result equal to the result is, right, dot to concatenate the string, and then we would say we can do this. I would say result equals to number one plus number two, right? I will say let's say result text equal to result, right? And then let's do this. So let's replicate the same thing for subtract. Let's just copy all of this. So we copy this, and we say else if equal to sub, and we say else if equal to more, and we say else, then just divide, right? So let's see how that goes. So you put this, we say here division, we say here multiplication, we say here subtraction, and we say here addition, right? Okay, so but the next thing is, what if the person did not supply? What if the person did not, like, for some reasons, if the calculate is not there, right? What do? We have to set an error message. So let's copy this result text, and we say else result text will be equal to, please click on the operation that you want to execute, right? So if we, for some reasons, we don't find calculate, right, then we'll do that. Then if it's not, we have to check for when it's not actually numbers. So if one of those two things are not actually numbers, and what do we say? We say please enter only numbers, right? And then let us check when the person hasn't supplied, when the person supplied empty number 1 and 2, please enter number 1 and 2. So let us check if the person did not even supply anything, right? Please enter number 1 and 2. It's still going to show, right? So but we also want that to show here, right? So what's the next thing we're going to do now, right? And then if somebody actually submitted something, we come down here and we're going to say echo, right? Let's echo this. So let's echo this. We say echo. You can actually echo HTML. So we say echo and we put this and we put this, but I don't want this to be in the center. I want this to be here, right? And then when we do that, we're going to say echo, and we're going to use bootstrap, right? And we would say class equal to alert okay, Alright, no point. Let's just bring it out. Just put it there. So we'd say results, and we'll say div, and then we say echo, and we say div, and we say div. No, we close this div here, right? So it's basically like writing HTML. Alright, so let's see how that actually goes, right? Let's run it. So we don't supply anything. Undefined web results on line 80. Use several posts. If it sets alright, let's just create an empty results, and then we say this. I know why that's showing there is because when we click submit, right, there's going to be number 1 and number 2 because it's already here on this form regardless, so it's going to be there. So this will not even stand anymore. That wouldn't be need to be there, right? So let's run that again. Alright, so it's supposed to, if we set number 1 and number 2, supposed to show if it sets number 1 and number 2. Oh, here's supposed to be number 2, right? So let's see about that. Okay, that still didn't work. If it sets number 1 and it set number 2 post, right? And then we have this here, method post action index.php, right? So if empty number 1 and empty number 2, if it's not empty, if number 1 is not empty, that's what this stands for, and number 2 is not empty. If number 1 is numeric and number 2 is numeric. Alright, let me just echo this. Yes, echo hello. Let's see if that is even working here. So alright, so that one is not even coming up here. So that means it's not even showing. If it sets number 1 alright, let's look at this. Value sub button type submit. Now where is it submitting to? Method post action index.php. Alright, and then this worked, but this didn't work. Okay, let's see. Echo hello. Alright, so that means number 1 and number 2 are actually there. Number 1 is not empty and number 2 is not empty. Number 1, number 2, number 2, name number 1, number 2. If number 1, number 2, if it's not empty, let's see. But same thing. So if number 1 is not empty and number 2 is not empty, else if they are empty, so why is it not? Okay, echo text enter something. Bottom type submit, bottom type submit. Okay, let's see. Okay, we change this to get. Let me see. If I change this to get, let's see what happens. I will say here get. Let's just get, find out what's going on. Right. So let's just run this. This is from hello index.php. So if I say number 1 and number 2 and calculate equal to add is getting all of this here. Number 1 is empty, so I say 1, number 1, number 2. Okay, let's change this to posts back. It's to posts. So when we have the issue is particularly in this place. If it's not empty, if number 1 is not empty and number 2 is not empty, right? So if number 1 is not empty and number 2 is not empty. Okay, if number 1 is not empty and number 2 is not empty, right? Okay. Okay, let me see. If I comment this out and then comment this out, let's see what happens. Alright, so let's remove all of this. Wow. The same thing. The same thing. If number 1 if it's not empty number 1 and it's not empty number 2, echo tests. Okay, alright, so what's that? What's it? So looking at this, if number 1 is not empty, number 1 is not empty, if number 1 is not empty, if number 1 is not empty, alright, so basically this is the issue here. So this result text is supposed to be result text. Alright, supposed to be result text, and then let's give it a shot and let's see how that goes. Right. Yep, so undefined variable results 84. So result text, right? And then let's do that. So you can see that it's all coming out here, right? So let's just put strong. Strong is to make it bold. So that resolves that issue basically. So we can see this. Please enter number 1 and 2, right? So by the time we supply number 1, it still says the same thing, right? But we want to do something. Let's put the value here, or let's see. We can do something here. So you can see PHP if he sets, right? If he sets post number 1, right? So we'll just say echo, no, we'll just say echo post number. So if the person actually submitted something, so the initial value of number 1 should be set to that, and then number 2. Alright, so look at this now. This is what's going to happen. We will supply 1 here. Okay, that's not coming up. Let's look at it. Alright, if it said post number 1, oh, so value equal to this, right? And let's say the value equal to this. We say value equal to this. So we're setting the value to the initial value the person set, right? You can see that there. So you will put it 2, right? And it's showing this test because of that test you put there to find out what was going on. So we're going to get rid of this test, right? And then we'll do this. So you can see that for subtract, multiply, and then divide, right? So basically this is a very basic PHP, this is a PHP bootstrap calculator. We hope you enjoyed it, and it just gives you an overview of what PHP is all about and all that. So thank you for your time, and do enjoy the rest of your day.